China just threw international law out the window with a move so brazen it has the Philippines screaming betrayal and the entire South China Sea region on the brink of military confrontation. Beijing's announcement of a new nature reserve at the disputed Scarborough Shoal isn't environmental protection. It's territorial theft disguised as conservation and could trigger the biggest naval crisis in Asia since World War II. The timeline reveals a calculated campaign of escalation that makes China's intentions crystal clear. China has approved the creation of a nature reserve at a disputed territory in the South China Sea, a decision that could escalate tensions with rival claimant the Philippines. But this wasn't a sudden decision. It was a culmination of months of systematic preparation that now threatens to ignite the world's most dangerous maritime flashpoint. Here's what makes this nature reserve announcement so explosive. China's State Council said the reserve designation was an important guarantee to preserve the atoll's ecosystem, but Philippine security officials condemned the move, calling it clear pretext for occupation. When environmental protection becomes military occupation in everything but name, we're witnessing the complete weaponization of conservation law for territorial conquest. The Philippine response has been swift and unprecedented in its condemnation. The Philippines said Thursday will file a diplomatic protest and slammed as illegitimate and unlawful China's plan to declare a Huangyandao National Nature Reserve. But diplomatic protests mean nothing when China has already demonstrated its willingness to use military force to enforce its illegal claims across the South China Sea. What makes this crisis so dangerous is a human cost that's already being paid by Filipino fishermen caught in the middle of this territorial grab. Philippine fishermen fear that China's plan to establish a nature reserve in the Scarborough Shoal could expose them to further harassment and make it even harder to operate in the disputed South China Sea atoll, which is already under the constant watch of Chinese Coast Guard vessels. These aren't abstract geopolitical maneuvers. These are families whose livelihoods are being destroyed by Chinese military aggression. The recent naval incidents reveal just how close this crisis is to exploding into open warfare. A Chinese Navy ship accidentally collided with a Chinese Coast Guard ship last month while trying to block a Philippine Coast Guard vessel near Scarborough Shoal. Philippine military officials said the high-speed crash may have killed at least 2 Chinese personnel, based on video footage. When Chinese forces are so aggressive, they're literally killing each other while trying to block Filipino vessels. We're already in a shooting war by any reasonable definition. The legal framework surrounding this crisis exposes China's complete contempt for international law and established arbitration. The ruling said Beijing's blockade there violated international law, however, as it was a traditional fishing ground for several countries, including China, the Philippines, and Vietnam. It also ruled that Beijing violated the rights of Filipinos, who were blocked by Chinese Coast Guard from fishing in a disputed shoal off northwestern Philippines. China, which claims the South China Sea nearly in its entirety, does not recognize the ruling. Philippine National Security Advisor Eduardo Ano's response reveals the depth of outrage this move has generated in Manila. National Security Advisor Eduardo Ano said China's planned Huangyan Island National Nature Reserve is patently illegal, citing violations of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea UNCLOS, the 2016 arbitral ruling in favor of Manila, and the 2002 Declaration on the Conduct of Parties. When a nation's top security official is publicly calling another nation's actions illegal, we're witnessing the breakdown of diplomatic norms that typically prevent military conflicts. The strategic implications of China's nature reserve gambit extend far beyond this single atoll. Scarborough Shoal sits astride some of the world's most important shipping lanes, through which over $3 trillion in global trade passes annually. By declaring a nature reserve, China is essentially claiming the right to regulate all maritime traffic through this critical choke point. This isn't just about fishing rights. This is about China's ability to strangle global commerce whenever it chooses. The environmental cover story for this territorial grab reveals the sophistication of China's hybrid warfare tactics. By framing territorial conquest as environmental protection, Beijing is making it politically difficult for other nations to oppose what appears to be conservation efforts. But this nature reserve designation gives Chinese forces legal justification under Chinese law to arrest anyone who enters the area without Beijing's permission, essentially turning international waters into a Chinese military zone. The timing of this announcement reveals careful coordination with China's broader South China Sea strategy. The move over Scarborough Shoal comes months after China published a set of geographic coordinates for the feature. This systematic approach, first establishing baselines, then creating legal frameworks for enforcement, demonstrates that China's South China Sea expansion is following a detailed master plan designed to present the international community with fait accompli situations that become increasingly difficult to reverse. The economic warfare dimension of this crisis is already devastating Filipino communities that depend on Scarborough Shoal's fishing grounds. These waters have supported Filipino fishing families for generations, but Chinese Coast Guard harassment has made fishing there increasingly dangerous and unprofitable. Now the nature reserve designation threatens to make it completely impossible, destroying livelihoods that sustain thousands of Filipino families. Regional implications are spreading rapidly as other South China Sea claimants realize that China's nature reserve strategy could be applied to their disputed territories as well. Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei are all watching to see whether the international community will allow China to use environmental law as a cover for territorial expansion. If this strategy succeeds, expect to see Chinese nature reserves declared across the entire South China Sea within months. The military implications are particularly alarming because nature reserve enforcement gives Chinese forces expanded legal justification for aggressive actions against foreign vessels. Under Chinese environmental protection laws, nature reserve violations can be treated as serious crimes requiring immediate arrest and detention. This legal framework essentially authorizes Chinese forces to treat any foreign presence in Scarborough Shoal as criminal activity subject to military response. The intelligence dimension reveals that China's nature reserve announcement was coordinated with expanded surveillance and reconnaissance operations throughout the South China Sea. Chinese military assets have been systematically mapping Filipino vessel movements, documenting fishing activities, and building comprehensive intelligence profiles that suggest preparation for much more aggressive enforcement actions in the near future. International law experts are describing China's nature reserve strategy as one of the most sophisticated attempts to circumvent international maritime law they've ever encountered. By using domestic environmental legislation to assert control over disputed international waters, China is creating legal gray areas that make international response much more complicated. Environmental protection enjoys such broad international support that opposing Chinese conservation efforts puts other nations in the politically awkward position of appearing to oppose environmental protection. The propaganda implications are equally sophisticated, with Chinese state media presenting the nature reserve as evidence of China's commitment to environmental stewardship while portraying Philippine opposition as reckless disregard for marine conservation. This narrative warfare is designed to shift international opinion towards supporting Chinese control over Scarborough Shoal as necessary for environmental protection. What makes this crisis so explosive is that both sides now have compelling reasons to escalate rather than de-escalate. China has invested too much political capital in its South China Sea expansion to back down, while the Philippines cannot appear weak when its territorial integrity and fishing communities are under direct assault. The stage is set for a confrontation where neither side can afford to blink first. The ultimate question isn't whether this nature reserve announcement violates international law. It clearly does. The question is whether the international community will enforce international law or allow China to complete its South China Sea conquest one nature reserve at a time. The answer will determine not just the fate of Scarborough Shoal, but the entire future of the rules-based international order that has prevented major power conflicts since World War II.